For my book review, I picked The Autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr. It's edited by Claiborne Carson, and it was originally published in the United States in 2001. To summarize this book, it follows Martin Luther King Jr. through his life from his perspective. So it starts out in his childhood. And when it talks about his childhood, it talks about his feelings towards both of his parents. His dad was a minister, and it also talks about his relationship with his siblings, how he came to know Jesus Christ at a very young age, and it also talks about his how he viewed living segregated as a child. After this, it goes on to talk about his college days, and it talks about how he didn't think ministry was really for him, and then eventually he changed his mind. It also has a chapter about his wife, Coretta, and how they met and how they moved from Atlanta, Georgia to closer to her home, Montgomery, Alabama. And it talks about her, and I was shocked. She's such an amazing woman through all of his movements and his jail time, his death threats to their family, attempted bombings on their family. Her faith in him never wavered. She was there for him through it all. The long nights, all the hours away from home, she was there for him through it all. And it just was amazing that she had the strength to continue through all of this. After this, it talks about his involvement and his leadership in the Montgomery bus boycotts following the arrest of Rosa Parks. And I found it very interesting throughout there because it also talks about the other people that were in like the leadership team with him to lead that movement. After this, it goes on to talk about some of his travels he did, and during one of his book signings, he was stabbed in the heart by a letter opener, and they told him if he would have sneezed, he would have died, which I thought was crazy. It also goes on to talk about the sit-ins that he was involved in the March on Washington, in his famous I Have a Dream speech, which I didn't know, but his phrase I have a dream was not actually meant for that speech. That phrase he had used in a previous speech, and it went over so well with the crowd that he thought that it would be a good time to use that again. So that's when he used that phrase again. So it was not originally part of his speech meant for that day. It also talks about how he won a Nobel Peace Prize. um, it's just a really good book. I read this entire book cover to cover, every word on every page. I would highly recommend this book, whether you're a teacher or not. Um, I think it's great for teachers, for one, because we have so many things we learn about that involve him: MLK Day, um, Black History Month, just him as a person, but also the civil rights movement. If you're in Alabama, the bus boycott, Montgomery and Rosa Parks, you learn a lot about that. Um, I would highly recommend this book, and I made a ton of connections to it because when I was reading this book, I am trying to juggle a ton of things right now, just like every other college student. And Martin Luther King Jr., he did that. He juggled so many things from writing a book or writing his thesis to being a leader in all of these movements to being a dad. He juggled it all. And he sacrificed a lot. A lot of nights of sleep he sacrificed so that he could do this. And I also think teachers can relate to Martin Luther King Jr. because as teachers, we need to see things past ourselves and how it benefits us. We have to see how it benefits other and what the bigger picture is. And Martin Luther King Jr. did that. He saw that if he led these movements and he, put himself in danger, that he could change the world for generations to come. And that's amazing. I also thought this book gave you a different perspective on him because it gives you the insight of him and what he was going through emotionally. It shows the emotions that he went through, the fears he had. I mean, when you think about Martin Luther King Jr., you think about the things he did, and you must think like, oh my goodness, he's fearless. But in reality, there was a lot of nights he couldn't sleep because he was so filled with fear for his family and for his own safety. But I would highly recommend this most for teachers, but also for anybody because it's great to know our history so history doesn't repeat itself. I built my lesson around him as a person, but you could also build your lesson around him and some other influential Black history people, because you could do like a segment on him for Black History Month. You could also use this book to build your lesson on the Montgomery bus boycotts or any other civil rights movements he did. In my lesson, we focus mainly on him and the effects of the civil rights movement on Alabama. So, in my lesson, we're going to start with a book called The Seeds of Freedom, and it is about integration and segregation of Huntsville, Alabama. So, it'll allow my kids to connect because they'll be from around here. And then we also go on to do a flip book about Martin Luther King Jr. and his life, and a lot of the facts for that flip book came from this book. And at the end, it'll ask students like what they learned, and this will allow them to make connections to him. And then for their assessment, they're doing a writing assessment, and they have a I have a dream worksheet, and the students on the I have a dream assignment, they're going to write about how they would solve a social injustice, which I think is really good for students to realize that there are still social injustice out there, and that it doesn't take, someone famous to change that. I mean, he was just a minister and he changed the world for the rest of everybody's lives for the generations to come. So I would highly recommend this book, and I think it was a great read. I'm not a huge reader, but I read this in like 2 days, and it was really good, and I had a hard time putting it down. So I think everybody should give this book a shot.